Here today with Mitch and Dan. Great intros. And without further ado, we can just jump right into what is today a meaty topic. We're about a year past the executive order, and we have great representation from both OMB and the private sector today to try and get a little deeper dive into M2209 and how that zero trust journey is going for agencies. General Dynamics has a report that we did recently that kind of didn't give a scorecard, but surveyed the agencies to see where they were doing. And a surprising number of agencies reported they were doing well on their planning stages to hit some of these marks moving forward. So we've got a table set in which we have agencies with positive energy, we have OMB set with a good amount of funding, and we have the private sector with a lot of strategies to implement to make sure they get through all these challenging marks as they go along the way. Mitch, let me start with you and let you chew on this one first. We've been looking at Zero Trust as a strategic initiative between the White House and OMB for a good bit of time. Can you tell us some of the key rationales and thinking that went into M2209?
Sure. Yeah, and let's kind of step back. You mentioned the executive order. It really did provide the impetus. This administration's been very focused on making cybersecurity a top priority, and that's, if you think about the backdrop before the executive order, we really had a lot of significant events happening at the time. We had, the SolarWinds infiltration by Russian operatives. We've had, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack that showed the very real world risks that exist when cybersecurity events can and will take place, frankly. So what we were really thinking is, how do we meet this moment, right? How do we get to a point where we are able to drastically reduce these type of threats that are escalating and coming very quickly at us, not just as a federal government, but as a nation? So, the goal of M2209, which is the federal cybersecurity strategy, is really to shift the government to a zero trust architecture and essentially move away from that perimeter-based defenses and work towards something that really will recognize that folks will always get their foot in the door, right? There's always going to be the next Log4j or Hafnium 0 day or something that provides an exploit that someone's going to be able to tackle. And what we want to ensure is when that does happen, there is as little room for them to move as possible and as quick a reaction as possible to shut it down, reducing the risk. So, when it came to the zero trust strategy, we saw that zero trust had been defined many ways by many people. So M2209, first and foremost, was an opportunity for us to say, this is what it means for government, right? And this is how we are going to get there. And that aligns with things like the CISA cybersecurity maturity model and the 5 pillars there, which I'm sure we'll get into later on. So I won't start going down that path. But, we're really essentially verifying that it doesn't mean that nothing is trusted. It means that trust must be continuously verified. And we do that through a number of ways that are outlined very discreetly and specifically in M2209. Our goal was really to ensure that we're getting agencies to a baseline of cybersecurity zero trust maturity and hoping that they will be able to continue to develop from there. And that's a 2-year process that we're outlining very specific steps for them to take. And we didn't create these in a vacuum. We worked very hard to try and work with our private sector partners to get in the sort of, not just wisdom, but frankly, we put out a draft, we got over 100 comments back, which is not typical for a general M memo, from the Office of Management and Budget. And, that was extraordinarily valuable to us in figuring out the right path forward and ensuring we were setting agencies on the right path. So, a lot of thought went into how will we create this baseline? How do we set agencies on the right path over the next 2 years? And, where do we want to see ourselves at that point? And that's where we're going.
Thank you. And so Dan, when the EO came out and the broader guidance started to hit, we didn't hear a traditional squelch from industry because of that upfront partnership. Can you talk about how your role and how with Dell and others that you've seen how this EO and the guidance from OMB has kind of matched what you were already doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So what was interesting about the executive order, there's a lot of obviously discussion around the federal government impact, but it was the nation's cybersecurity, right? So it was an expansive conversation that covers both federal government and corporate and commercial responsibility in protecting the nation, right? So if we, as Mitch highlighted, there were events that preceded the executive order that drove action. And we've seen a lot of events post the order's release that have driven additional realization that this is something that has to happen. You have to have stronger collaboration around cybersecurity between government and commercial organizations in order to be successful, right? When bad actors try to destabilize the nation, they're not just going after the government websites and things like that. They're going to be trying to destabilize, of course, the banking industries and transit industries and utilities that all have private organizational functions within them, right, from a commercial perspective. So a unified capability and response to protect those assets is required. So that's been an interesting part of this, and probably why there hasn't been a large outcry, like you mentioned, from commercial or OEMs about like, wow, how are we going to meet this? Because a lot of these things were already in play. The idea around zero trust and what we'll say is both outsider and insider threat isn't new thinking per se, right? It's always been something that the cyber folks have been focused on. But what I would say has this executive order has helped is it's helped revitalize the idea that we all have a role, right? You go talk to any CISO, right, security officer in an organization, and they will tell you about the number of conversations that they have with their, the people that they support around their security solutions, slowing down productivity. Now it's a bigger understanding that, no, we need to work together to make these security solutions enable your productivity effectively and protect the data that is moving through them, right? So that is what I'd say is a critical aspect that the executive order drove, is that joint ownership of the service provider and the people who they're protecting, right? With COVID and the move to remote workforce for both commercial and government this last 2 years, the understanding that security and cybersecurity has to extend outside of just small enclaves is another element of that. And again, it gets into that shared perspective that the executive order drove, which has been pretty amazing. So the other element that I'll hit on just to kind of kick this off too, that Mitch talked on, is the maturity, right? So every organization within the federal government and commercial organizations have some sort of cybersecurity framework they were pursuing. And the executive order did a good job of saying, hey, go examine what you're doing. Don't rip everything out and start fresh. It's a matter of examining what you're doing, looking at it from a capabilities standpoint to meet the goals and requirements of the executive order and the other orders that have followed since then from MBO, and rate your maturity. It's a journey. It's a journey that is not going to end. There's always a new threat. There will always be a new order, and there will always be new capabilities to protect. So
I think that's a great way to describe it, as a journey. So we have agencies, and I'll turn back to Mitch. We have agencies that have taken that first step, and they've submitted their plans. They've got one-on-one deep dives going on with OMB right now. So we're not asking you to tattle on any of your any agencies yet, but just from a general perspective, when we talk to agencies, how should they be thinking about, are they making good progress with these first steps? What are the key rationales that when you're looking at these assessments and plans that they're moving forward in a positive direction, if you were to say a scorecard for how they're doing?
Yeah, and listen, like, if you've seen one agency, you've seen one agency. For those who work around the federal government, right? Everyone has a unique starting point to begin with, and certainly, as probably Dan can attest to in the private sector as well, there's folks who have a really good grasp on one part and do certain things extraordinarily well, and perhaps need uplift in other areas as well. And that's not unique to the public sector. So what we're seeing with these implementation plans is a wide variety of starting points, but all of them, and this kind of goes back, Matt, to what you were saying, a lot of enthusiasm and big vision and right track type thinking. in how they want to move forward. So what we're committed to doing and what we have been doing is meeting with all these agencies. We've built a cross-agency, cross-sector team of subject matter experts who is sitting down and having these very real conversations with agencies about what is in their plan and how it aligns with M2209, the federal Zero Trust strategy, and where we hope to see that go. So oftentimes it's a little bit of a steer. Sometimes it's a bit more of a deep dive in one area or another, but that's helping refine the plans and move them forward. And if we do see opportunities for continued engagement, we're looking for opportunities to do that. And that might involve the Office of Management and Budget. It might involve our other partners who are involved in this. You know, our subject matter expert team includes folks from USDS, it includes folks from CISA at DHS, it includes folks from the Office of the National Cyber Director. And we're trying to ensure that we're bringing all these minds together, speaking with one voice about where we want to see the government go. Now, I think a lot of agencies are excited about these plans and are excited to get started and have a lot of questions around them. So we're providing that technical assistance, not just through this group, but through other ways as well, such as through CISA's kind of operational roles. So I think they are getting the initial feedback they need. Over the long term, you know, we intend to continue measuring that outcome and output. The plans themselves have very discrete deadlines that are put in for certain items, and other items we basically said, you know, we recognize this is hard and it depends where you start, right? So why don't you tell us when you can achieve these goals? So we're getting all this information together. And I think, you know, because the deadlines are so clear and because the actions are pretty clear, there's different ways to go about doing them, don't get me wrong, but agencies know where they're supposed to go. So I think we're going to be able to see, are agencies able to clear these goals? Are they able to achieve what they're looking for? Some of them are very much, they tend to be direct things, right? Like take a FISMA moderate system and move it on to a public facing internet accessible manner. And that's not just to make it happen, but it's really to flex those muscles at agencies and ensure they are able to, you know, build a zero trust environment, an untrusted environment out in the public internet. And, you know, that may not be appropriate for every single system, but it certainly creates opportunities for them to, you know, flex those muscles and build the right security that frankly matters on their networks probably as much as it does when they have a public facing application. So there's a lot of opportunities like that to see, have they done the right things? And as we continue forward, we'll be working with them to ensure they achieve those goals.
Excellent. And when we start talking about maturity, we have to kind of jump into some of these categories. And one of them that came up, and Dan, I'll turn to you, when we start talking about zero trust building blocks, because we're talking about a whole new approach to security, when we've ditched the perimeter, or at least the perimeter is the only perimeter technique, and start looking at individual actions. Data governance is a big part of that. And so from your seat, where are you seeing some progress made there?
Yeah, what is interesting in some of the things that Mitch hit on, I'm going to hit on both identity management and data governance. And these things connect, right? So the biggest thing that we've been talking with organizations around is expanding the idea of identity. In general, when people hear the term, they instantly think of the person and that person's access, right? The credentials they use to get into the network. And we've had a lot of discussions with organizations on how you expand the idea of identity to include systems, right? The laptops and phones and servers and network devices that run the network they all have identity as well. And getting past that into applications and services too. And like with some of the threats as it relates to malware and ransomware that you highlighted at the beginning, those things act on device controls and service controls. So if you're working with organizations to help them understand how to expand that idea of identity, that's critical, so that they can start figuring out how to put in systems and solutions and policies that control that movement within the network, that moves from the border into what I'd say is more of an internal lateral movement approach, right? Like where are you allowed to go as a system or application or service? And then that actually does tie into what we were just hitting on here with data governance, right? I can't protect something if I don't know how big it is. So organizations getting their hands around where the data is created, who owns it, who should have access to it, what are the policies for movement, all of that kind of stuff has to be defined. And what's interesting too is that the thought around zero trust and cybersecurity shouldn't be a solo discussion. Mitch hit on some great stuff about basically multi-cloud, right? Like what should be in the data center versus what should be in the cloud. And when you start expanding that, it goes back to, well, where's the edge, right? The edge is what I'd say is the newest thought on a lot of people's mind, because more and more data is being created every day because of the Internet of Things and the expansion of where we do work. So the edge is expanded. So how do you ensure that you're protecting your data where it's created and deciding what should be moved back to your core data center or your core cloud services for processing, right? So when organizations are looking at these things, we often talk with them around the idea of solution convergence, right? So even on this topic here, we're talking about zero trust, but zero trust has no meaning on its own. You have to apply it to an overall architecture and operational model and policies, right? So how are you implementing zero trust for your edge? How are you implementing it for your cloud and your core data centers? How are you implementing it for your endpoints, right? All of those have to come into that discussion too, which means there's opportunity for collaboration and discussion around how to achieve these goals together that can help with some of the funding issues I think we're going to talk about in a little bit.
So we had a question come in from the audience, and I wanted to kind of pitch this to Mitch. As we're talking about those building blocks, one of the questions is talking about zero trust with the non-security professionals getting easier? When you start talking things like identity for all the govies and ex-govies, we're used to having that pay over that cap card. And so that kind of resonates, that we're talking about securing our identity when we're working with things. But we have to kind of evolve in some cases, in addition to that card-based credential for some of these trust setups. Has it been easier to have these conversations?
You know, I think that there's still a general need to kind of build awareness around all of this, right? And it doesn't just have to go with zero trust or which direction you're taking, but I think people understand that there's real risk out there, and we do have to kind of inform people about that risk. But also, you know, we don't want this to be, zero trust doesn't have to happen in a vacuum, right? It should be aligned with the services and service delivery being provided, right? Our federal CIO is Claire Martirana is very enthusiastic about saying that, you know, you have great policy, but you really need the technology and underpinning, you know, efforts to really deliver on that policy. And I think people recognize that part of having the right technology and service delivery is really security. There have been, you know, out of our office, an executive order on customer experience. The presidential management agenda puts forward, you know, not only the importance of delivering on services, but that they be delivered in a secure manner. And I think that they can be all brought together in a comprehensive approach. You know, I think, you know, you can see from the private sector side that you don't have to make a choice necessarily between seamless, you know, well-crafted services and security. It does have to be a conscious decision to do it well and do it together, but there doesn't necessarily have to be a compromise between the two, particularly when it comes to zero trust. And I think identity has a lot to do with that. You know, we have built on the federal side, and it's being deployed all the more often, login.gov, which allows you to have one account for your government access. That allows agencies to allow people to have things like a multi-factor authentication approach to gain access to federal services. And you're seeing that increasingly widely adopted. I think those are kind of examples about how we make government both more accessible and more secure by building robust solutions that can be utilized across government or in ways that are just seamless behind the scenes, checking and ensuring that we are securing data for people in the right way.
And to add to what Mitch said, Matt, what the executive order has done too to help with some of the things he talked about with seamless applications and service delivery, but you have to make security a conscious part of that discussion, is it's helped with, and I know this is going to sound absurd, but it's helped with marketing and brand for cyber, right? So you have the pillars that were defined around device, user, transport, application, and data trust, right? Each of those being a pillar. And now we are able to have discussions with organizations that may not have been entirely cyber focused, but were a big part of the solutions that were brought into government. I'll give you a great example: procurement, right? Procurement organizations, they will look at the requirements and they will hit on exactly what the cyber is defined inside of that requirement. But now there's more discussion going into how do you implement those elements within the solution you're bringing to the customer into the wider cybersecurity framework and zero trust goals that that customer needs to meet to make sure things are compatible. And from a simplification standpoint, I love to use this, this example that I do with a lot of organizations around how it's really simplified the discussion, because I can have it with anybody about the principles of zero trust. I have my cell phone, which you can't see here because there we go. I have my cell phone, which is a device. I log into that device with my identity, like a user identity. I then traverse a VPN to get into my corporate network. I leverage an application to get into my email, and then I access email data. And I can talk with someone in procurement or someone in application development or other elements that may not totally be focused on security in that manner and say, okay, how are we covering the security requirements for zero trust to meet the spirit of what went on in the executive order, as well as meet the customer's current operational and maturity goals. So that is something that has really been helpful over this last year. So just wanted to touch on that.
No problem. And you use the word acquisition, and that resonates with our roles that we all understand from OMB. So Mitch, as agencies start to do this, and they're going to say, I have limited funds, I have resource challenges, because that's what agencies say. No matter what, how much money you give them, there is that challenge. Now, I don't want to belittle the challenges that are in front of them to implement this and the costs there. What advice are you giving to, as you go through these implementation plans and look at resources? Is there a good picture, a good story there already?
Yeah, listen, like we, like everywhere, have limited resources, right? And we want to do this in the best and most effective way. And sometimes those align well, and sometimes we have to make real decisions about, what comes first, second, and third. What we're doing is we're working with agencies to ensure they have the resources to implement what we put forward as priorities in the zero trust strategy. And this is really deliberate decisions made about which direction the federal government is going in. And they are aggressive. They can cost money, yes, but we think we are also providing a framework for them to get there, not just from the, thou shalt side or thou should, but really from how do we help from a procurement and access standpoint. So, obviously CISA has their continuous diagnostics and monitoring CDM program, and mitigation, CDM program. And they are, that is woven in, frankly, to the zero trust strategy to a great degree, where there's a lot of opportunities to leverage things like endpoint detection and response, some of the other things that are underneath that umbrella to drive through this kind of common contract, right? And in addition, we're working with our folks at CISA and GSA to ensure that where shared services make sense, we're able to ensure those are being developed. There are things in here that are ambitious and certainly will cost more money, but there's also opportunities for cost savings. For instance, we go heavy on identity in the zero trust strategy. And some of that involves trying to reduce the number of master user records, right? There are opportunities for cost savings there. There are opportunities for not just looking at PIV as your only solution when it comes to identity, but also looking at how to leverage FIDO and WebAuthn and those other phishing resistant technologies when it comes to verifying people's identity. These should be freeing opportunities for agencies to think creatively about where they're making their investments and do it in such a manner that is cost effective. And we're happy to work with them and have those discussions. We've already had a lot of those conversations with various agencies who are thinking about where to place their bets. And we're trying to ensure that not only are they aware, but those enabling partners like CISA and GSA are also aware of those pain points. And we'll continue to have those conversations. This isn't a conversation that ends tomorrow. And I'm sure we're going to continue learning and continuing to have opportunities to find shared services and other ways of really driving forward on this.
And to go off what Mitch said real quick, Matt, like we talked about a minute ago too, there's a lot of opportunity around solution convergence. Organizations should be looking at their current IT projects and data modernization initiatives to see where they can leverage cross collaboration or cross solution development. I'll give you an example, right? So we talked a little bit about data governance, identifying where your data is created, who owns it, marking it, categorizing it. That all applies to Zero Trust. It also applies to AI ML. You have to have good, clean, well-structured data sets to enable AI ML. Are you doing those efforts? Then use that investment with AI ML to help you with Zero Trust. Same thing when people are looking at edge or cloud solutions. Data governance comes in there. And identity touches each one of these projects too. Make sure that you're scoping in your identity solution requirements into your initiatives to help make sure that you're not missing something that you'll need later to meet your identity goals. So there's a lot of opportunity to really look at everything you're doing with data modernization and IT project-driven purchasing to help you across the board.
And Dan, what I would follow up with that is when we talk about resources on the federal side, in the private sector side, there's not unlimited resources there either, but the tighter resource is going to be the cyber professionals. So it used to be a resonating story with C-suite alone before we started talking about Zero Trust, that we would start talking a risk-based approach in which we start talking about crown jewels. And when we talked about crown jewels, we were effectively deputizing non-security professionals into the security plan process. Can you share some of your examples of how you're having to deputize these non-security professionals to really key in on these processes?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I said, what it's done, Zero Trust and the executive order, and what it's done is it's driven the idea that everyone has a responsibility. We are having a lot more conversations with our application developers, with our architecture folks, people who define network architectures or who pursue cloud development pursuits around, hey, when you're doing these things, you need to understand the security implications to meet these goals and all these definitions and requirements when they're developing those things, in order to make it easier for the fewer resources that are frankly available just from a hiring perspective in these security spaces. So it's sharing that burden across the board with everyone involved. Like I said, to include the people who submit the requirements, the people who do the development, the people who do the procurement, the people who do the purchasing, and the people who do the implementation. Lots of different organizations all have a role in helping achieve the security goals. And it's the only way we're going to be successful, because it's going to be, it's a challenge to find enough and have the right resources engaged at the right times if you're strictly focusing on security personnel only.
And I might add to that, that was something we thought about a lot in how we put together not just the M2209, the federal Zero Trust strategy, but also other elements around the executive order. To start with the Zero Trust strategy, there's a chief data officer, chief information security officer working group that now is working on a cross-government data categorization schema that will help agencies determine when to really categorize data in certain security manners that will be helpful for them as they integrate identity and data decisions at their agency about access. And that goes back to kind of selective verification, whether it's device level or identity, and what kind of access to information they should have based on that sort of trusted identity verification. We also ensured that as we were building these plans, right, we emphasized and pushed agencies not just to work within the typical technology environment, but really talk with their CFOs at length about what this might look like for the organization as a whole, and what might be possible, and how this might connect, particularly if you're creating a master user record, how can that be leveraged by other parts of the organization, right? Things like that might be helpful to have those broader conversations, both around budget and implementation. And moving out, Dan mentioned this, but when you look at the secure software development framework, when you start talking about things like DevSecOps, you really have to bring in the business units, and you have to have those conversations about what does this mean for the long term for your organization? How do we integrate this in such a way that is empowering rather than slowing things down? And those conversations are critical, whether you're in government or outside.
So that we have a question from the audience. This one is keys off of the comment, Mitch, that you made around the EO for customer experience. And I'll turn to Dan. Does Zero Trust tie into that customer experience? Are we looking to get a better overall customer experience while increasing security by following these steps, especially when we start talking about multiple outcomes from a single solution?
I would say yes, absolutely. And here I can use actual experience that we've all had over the last 10 to 15 years. Anybody who's been working in IT, or even we all mentioned at the beginning of the hour, who has a laptop. The technology that drives security is continuing to get better. It's continuing to be refined and work more seamless and behind the scenes than it has. If you had a system that you were using 5 or 7 years ago, and you started it up, it took probably a while to get going, and there were all of these things going on in the background from a security perspective that would slow it down, right? Now, we are seeing that there is a capability through both optimization of the software and different solutions that support your security model to decrease that kind of lag in system startups and things like that. And that all lends to that, what I'd say is that usability. Single sign-on, right? How long ago did we all have 100 different sign-ons to get into every application? And now the capability that we've realized, wow, that's a terrible security model. We need to start shrinking this down so it's easier to account for everybody and have a chain of understanding of where everyone's coming from. That's made the security experience better. And it's only going to get better from here, right? All of these things have contributed to a better user experience while either maintaining, or most cases, improving the actual security model around those experiences.
And Mitch, I'll turn that question to you as well. With your implementation plans and the work you're doing with agencies, is customer experience coming up as a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, we recognize these go hand in hand, and you have to ensure that one is empowering the other. So we're talking about things, and to build on what Dan said, I couldn't agree more with his kind of viewpoint of this. But, we talk about, just as one example, really moving that kind of authentication from the network layer to the application layer. And I think that alone is the sort of thing with single sign-on that really does create a much more dynamic and understandable environment for the user. You're not, it's a security benefit, but you're also really moving towards a setup where you're able to understand and directly access what you're looking for, as opposed to kind of searching around on a virtual desktop or something like that, or logging in through a common VPN, right? Which might bring you into a network, and moving also towards secure cloud, where there might be a little bit less opportunity for lag or more elasticity, are all opportunities for a better user experience in the end. So there are a lot of kind of modernizations that underlie this sort of movement. The executive order recognizes that as well from a broader standpoint when it comes to secure software development and other things, that really we are moving the security really to be baked into everything we do as opposed to layered on top of it.
So one of the things that every agency wants to do when they have a conversation with the public or OMB is they want to say they're innovative. And so when it comes to zero trust, that's a great buzzword for being innovative because they're leaning forward into their obligations. But another buzzword they really like to use is to say we're automating some of our processes and we're looking to integrate some of our legacy systems into an automated process. So Dan, are you seeing that the automation push is layering and going hand in glove, like you mentioned, the AI ML and the data tagging? Is zero trust partnering with that automation, especially on the security side?
Oh, it has to be, and it is, and it has to be, because the reason is that it's not possible if you're truly implementing an effective zero trust model. You've greatly increased your logging and alerting capabilities on all of your, like all of the things we just talked about from a identity standpoint, on the user, on the systems, on the applications, on the services, and to expect that people would be able to look at things and identify variances, right? Like having both policies, both on access and both on behavior, right? On what a thing is doing is not achievable from a human standpoint, right? That's going to take a large amount of analytics. And then when that analytics identifies behavior, automation to assess that and take action, which could be to block it, or to segregate it, or just to alert, right, that there's a variance here. So that's where the automation and zero trust is really kicking in, is how it observes what is going on within the wider enterprise network and makes action based on the defined policies of that organization.
Yeah, and we're certainly looking at, how do we ensure that agencies are setting up those policies in such a way that it's going to make things like not just identity, but merging that with device level signals, right? And how do we ensure that we're making those decisions to determine are the right things on the front end being taken care of before we get to the logging and issues when we are hopefully not, but occasionally inevitably looking to see if something malicious did happen, right? So we are hopefully creating less risk on the front end and the back end. And, I think there's some fantastic things going on at agencies as they think through these opportunities to automate both detection and response in a way that will really align and provide rich data to their SOCs and other frankly, to their users as well, to know when they're creating risk for themselves.
I couldn't agree more. And I will tell you from our perspective, we see automation as something that everybody sees as not just innovation buzzword, which it sort of is when they're talking in the PR world, but at the implementation layer, it is a must-have. And we talk about that because there aren't enough people to go through all these logs to identify, the key items or just do that pattern recognition. Quick question to you, Mitch, when it comes to personnel, are you seeing the pull now that the government has these big goals to get these agencies? Are you seeing the talent come into the agencies to perform this? Or are we still in the balance where private sector is really having to lean in to assist? I know we have the contractor relationship, but I know there's some true roles within the government that still need to be filled for those good CISO and data officer roles.
So first, I'll use this as an opportunity to welcome anyone in your audience who wants to come help out, to look at usajobs.gov. There's lots of wonderful opportunities out there, and you get to work on mission sets that really are unlike anywhere else in the best way possible and solve some of those toughest problems. So, if you want that sort of challenge and you want that sort of mission-driven work, we welcome you. And frankly, I think that is a key selling point that a lot of people see. You get to work on these amazing issues. And frankly, if you look at the executive order, if you look at M2209, our federal zero trust strategy, these are really not us catching up. This is us placing markers and saying we're moving towards the future and we're working to really be ahead of the threat that is getting we're really seeing, and frankly, as the federal government, a real target, right? We are one of the prime targets, and frankly, a lot of the malicious actors It's not a matter of reducing risks and raising costs alone. They're going to go after us no matter what. So we have to be among the best. And we want the best of the best to help us do that. Now, I think there's been a strong hiring push. CIS has done a lot around this, and we continue to drive forward on workforce. I think it's not only about attracting folks to government, but really lifting up the industry and building those pathways in for everyone, because this is, as we all know in the industry, a near zero unemployment environment for information security professionals, and frankly, that broader community around them that we need to empower information security professionals. So we need to continue to drive forward to bring more people in, to educate them, to uplift them. And that's both within government and outside of it. And we have been doing a lot of that. CIS has been leading a lot of ways in that environment, along with the Office of Personnel Management and our office. So, more to come on that front, but I would say that we are getting strong individuals, but there's always that need for more. And that means all of us doing the uplift together, right, to ensure that the industry is moving in the right direction and has the bodies it needs.
All right. Well, we're closing out here, and before I turn it back over to Megan, I want to give both of you thanks, but I also want to give you the ability to close out. Dan, any last comments?
Yeah, absolutely. So when organizations, whether you're federal or commercial, are looking at zero trust or trying to pursue it, the key is it's a never-ending journey. Like we started at the beginning, the tools are going to continue to get better. The policies are going to continue to be refined. The requirements are going to get stronger because there are always newer threats. So the goal is to just continue to establish and understand where you are in your maturity model against all of your objectives within a zero trust pursuit, and understand that you're not going to get everything to 100% at once. That shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to understand where you are so you can identify and put the bets on where you need to strengthen to get better. That would be my closeout.
Excellent. Mitch?
Yeah, I will say, we recognize that this is going to be a long journey, that we're setting forward aggressive, ambitious goals. But that's really the environment we're all working in now. And we can't do this alone. We're going to need the private sector partners. We're going to need the public writ large. We're going to need personnel who are in this field, who are just interested in kind of the greater security of our nation, to all be working together to get this to where it needs to be. And I think that it's a really fantastic time to be in this community and to be helping drive results forward on behalf of not just the federal government, but really the nation as a whole. And it's an exciting thing to be a part of. I think that when it comes to zero trust in the federal government specifically, we have a ways to go, but I think over the next 2 years, we're all going to be really excited about where agencies have gotten and how the federal government has uplifted itself because of these clear goals that have been put out there. And we'll continue to share as much as we can, obviously, about how agencies are moving forward and protecting themselves. I think it's a great opportunity for us to really make a strategic shift that is both necessary, exciting, and important for our government and the nation. So look forward to continuing the dialogue with everyone.